To this special edition of the Journal Editorial Report as we look back on the year that was and the challenges facing us in 2013. First to our big stories of 2012 and America's left turn from the Supreme Court's landmark health care decision to the re-election of President Barack Obama. Politics on the national level headed in a decidedly liberal direction. So what happened and what does it mean for the country going forward? Joining the panel this week, Wall Street Journal columnist and deputy editor Dan Henninger, political diary editor Jason Riley, and Washington columnist Kim Strassel. So, Dan, we've been, like to say for a long time, we live in a center-right country. If you look at the last two presidential elections, that doesn't seem to be the case. Are we living now in a new progressive era?
In terms of the presidency, I think we are, Paul. I'm not so sure about the country. But Barack Obama, I think, is the most center-left, even left-wing president since the Great Depression. And I think what Barack Obama has in mind to do is indeed to redistribute income from the top downward, not to cut spending, but to increase spending. It's explicit from a historic 20% of GDP to about 25% of GDP. And rather than cut spending, raise taxes as necessary to support that spending. And I would say that is, in fact, essentially the French model. The question is whether that model can produce enough growth to support jobs in the economy.
No question, Jason. Taxes are going up. We know that. Spending going up for sure, even before the health care law kicks in. Yeah. So we are moving in that direction, particularly in the entitlement state of not reforming it, but actually expanding it.
And what happened this year was the Supreme Court helping this along. You had the justices essentially rewrite legislation, changing the plain text that Congress passed in order to declare Obamacare constitutional, which is a little scary, that the highest justices in the land would take that sort of activist role. And you mentioned France, Dan. That's what's really scary, that the backdrop of this whole presidential election year was Europe. We know where this path leads. Yes. All this turmoil, these huge welfare states, and how unsustainable they are, and the low productivity and the high unemployment that comes along with them. That was the backdrop of our presidential campaign.
Well, okay, and the voters voted, and they said, yeah, we're going to keep moving in that direction, Kim. I mean, what do you think the electorate is here? Is it really behind the kind of choices that Jason just suggested they might be?
Barack Obama won this election by very effectively making this a referendum about his opponent, Mitt Romney. So if you went out and you asked most Americans, do you think Barack Obama did a great job in his first term? Do you want significantly higher taxes? Do you want the government to do nothing about spending? Are you happy with Obamacare? Most would say no. But in the end, the choice was between a president who said, things aren't great, but I'm going to still keep trying to make them better, and a guy who he painted as not having a plan and not identifying with the average wants and needs of most middle-class Americans. And in the end, people decided to stick with the devil that they knew rather than the one they didn't.
So the election, the Republican defeat was big, but it wasn't overwhelming in the sense of a repudiation, in your view, Kim, of the Republican platform or of their agenda.
No, and I think the reason, look, this country did have the opportunity in this election to once again hand completely controlled government to Democrats. Everyone in the House was up for re-election, and yet they continued to give Republicans a majority there. They like divided government, and I think you've got to look, too, at the number of states that have elected very conservative governors who are doing the exact opposite of what Barack Obama is doing at the federal level.
Dan, there are some real implications, consequences to the direction, the policy direction the president's setting, one of which is there's going to be a lot less money for defense, so the American ability to project power abroad is going to decline, and maybe rapidly. Yeah. The key question, of course, economic growth. Can we get out of this 1% to 2.5% band we've been in for 4 years now and break out of that? And if we can't, the kind of commitments the government is making are just going to be unaffordable.
You know, I think I had previously cited the Nobel economist, the Nobel laureate Robert Lucas, University of Chicago, who looked at this closely and said, why are we not getting economic growth in the United States economy? And he cited Europe, indeed, which in the 1970s fell off its growth path of around 3% after World War II. And he concluded it was because, as Jason was just suggesting, the welfare commitments they had made. It was unsustainable, and their growth rate dropped permanently. And Lucas raised the question whether the United States itself was on this lower long-term growth path. That's the big question.
So, Jason, where do we go from here? I mean, particularly if you are a conservative, where does the comeback begin? Does it begin in somehow accommodating the middle and saying, look, it's a progressive era and we've got to be a little less progressive, a little more efficient in terms of administration? Or do you put bold colors out there as an alternative?
Well, I think it starts with the GOP expanding its current coalition, and I think that Hispanic voters are one way to go. I mean, you have to remember, just 8 years ago, 44% of Hispanics voted for the Republican presidential candidate. 4 years ago, it was 31%. This year, it was 27%. This is a swing voting bloc, and Republicans need to go after it. And, you know, Paul, I consider recognition of a problem to be progress in and of itself, and maybe the GOP is finally going to come to grips with this demographic reality.
Yeah, I think so. Dan, what about this idea of do you go to the middle or do you fly with bold colors?
Well, I think it'll be hard to go entirely to the middle, because I think the electorate, the ones who did not vote for Barack Obama, voted against this vision and voted against it very strongly. And I think the Republicans would put that at risk if they went too far to the middle.
Okay, when we come